for those that have no idea what's going on in Buffalo, what's the big picture going on there?
Buffalo is super toxic, and people are suffering and literally dying, and it's absolutely nothing new. It's been happening for over a decade. A lot of stuff has come out, and nothing's being done about it because of gentrification. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, obviously, but one of the main ones is gentrification. So they're trying to force people out of the minority neighborhoods in the city of Buffalo. And interview after interview, everybody's saying, I mean, what better way to force people out than keep them sick? Why would they want to fix the pipelines and the soil and the water when they're trying to get people out? So there are so many things happening in Buffalo. We have one of the highest lead rates in the entire country. So Reuters did a report, and they found 3,000 spots in the United States with higher lead levels than Flint. And that's not to play down what's happening in Flint, because that's horrible. But it's just to say that this is a nationwide thing. It's not just one or two places. So there's 3,000 places that are worse than Flint, Buffalo being at the top. So I think it was 2009, tests came out that 45% of the children in 5 zip codes, all minority neighborhoods, tested incredibly high for lead levels. So New York State says, or the DEC says, anything over 4 requires public assistance, and New York State says it's 10, which I don't really know why. So these children are averaging around 40. That's me. So, like, they're at the point where they're getting chelation, and they're in the hospital 3 times a week. And I'm not just saying this hearsay. Like, if you watch my interviews, I'm interviewing person after person after person whose child is incredibly sick. And like I said, this is since 2009. So as far as the lead goes, 1% of the houses have been remediated since 2009. And that's just about the paint. But we also have lead in the water, which they don't want anybody to know about, because obviously it's going to cost way more to remediate or to get rid of the lead in the water to fix the entire infrastructure of the pipes than just to, paint over some lead paint. So they had this whole thing in what happened in Flint, where they skewed the tests, and they tested, I'll just read you, this is the one fact I wrote down. The city collected 5 of the 300 samples in the past 5 rounds of testing from homes and zip codes where children tested high for lead levels. Okay, 5 of the 300 samples came from the homes where children were testing high for lead levels. In comparison, 41 of the 300 samples came from homes and zip codes where absolutely no children tested positive for lead levels. And the rest came from predominantly white neighborhoods where they really didn't have lead problems either.
What that is called is you can't find what you don't look for. And it's happening in Flint and all over. I'm actually working on a big story now, basically about the EPA and state agencies that essentially cherry pick data, maybe look on blocks where the homes are newer, maybe look on blocks where there is no reported illness or anything like that, so that they're not finding higher lead levels or other things. And it seems like that's going on.
And they're breaking federal regulations. Like, there's literally federal regulations that say you have to have this many number of houses tested that have lead lines running to them. And I got the reports, and they did not do that. So I don't understand how they're getting away with all this. Why are there regulations if people can break them? I don't know. I guess whatever, the rules aren't made for politicians to follow. So and then the mayor would get on TV and tell everybody, the water in Buffalo is great, and then all the people in the suburbs would say everything's fine. And we're having these children in the inner city who literally have, 40 is insane. A lead level of 40. Mm-hmm. These children's lives are permanently destroyed. And
if you don't know, the normal allowable limit is 15 parts per billion, and you're getting 40.
Yeah. So, and it just gets so much worse. It's not just like, oh, there's a lead problem. It's like the city knows, and there's also toxic soil with PCBs and VOCs and lead and arsenic, because Buffalo was a huge part of the Industrial Revolution, and they were dumping all this shit without any, ramifications back then, but now this entire neighborhood on the east side of Buffalo is plagued with lupus, and the DEC knows about this, and there's been books written about the lupus outbreak, and this has been since the mid-90s. And it's getting to the point where when they first found out, it was 65 people in an 8-block radius had lupus. 65 people in an 8-block radius, and that was in the early 90s. And they didn't do shit about it. And now the children have lupus because they were born into it. And a 20-year-old young man just passed away because he had a lupus flare-up, and his kidneys and all his vital organs failed him, and he died. And just, I think a few days ago, another 12-year-old girl, same thing, in the hospital. And nothing's being done about it. And again, it's about, one of the main things is gentrification. So...
And by the way, lupus, autoimmune, when I was in East Chicago and these other places, you see constantly, severe bronchitis, recurring, can't get rid of it, lupus, fibromyalgia, some other illnesses that are escaping my mind that, doctors could say, oh, that's too bad, people get these things. But they're all happening in toxic, industrial, polluted areas that either you have, whether it be Steel City, Buffalo, known as Steel City, or East Chicago, Indiana. I mean, you had BP, Arcadis, U.S. Lead. So basically, America was built by these industrial pollution, really. They didn't put those factories near the wealthy people. They put them near the poor white people, the black people, the Latinos. Actually, they put them maybe near formerly middle class, but due to a lot of other things I talk about a lot, are now the working poor. And now the people are sick, but instead of helping the people, from what you tell me in your reporting, they're basically building new buildings on top of them.
Yeah, so let me just say, going back to the lead, something that just I brought up. So they haven't fixed any of the pipes, and they're denying it's the water, right? They're denying it's the water. Yet, they did manage to push out all of the people from the waterfront, and the homeless shelters are overrun. So gentrification, they raised the rent, they made it so that they couldn't get public housing. It's very complicated, and I have a lot of interviews on it, but when they built these high-rise condos on the waterfront and they put it in the Buffalo News like, oh, the millennials have this trendy new neighborhood on the waterfront with these great lofts and these coffee shops and yoga studios, and everybody's like, yay, the mayor is doing such a good job, except for the people who lived there and no longer have homes. But the funny thing is, they replaced all the pipes in that area. They replaced all the water pipes in that area. So if there was no problem with the pipes, then why did they replace it when they're making these lofts for these rich people? Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous.
And by the way, they're doing that in other places. Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where that criminal governor, Rick Snyder, has an apartment. Ann Arbor preemptively changed the pipes. They didn't have a problem. They changed all the lead pipes. And in other places in Michigan and other states, in wealthier communities, they're preemptively changing lead pipes. But places that have poorer people, black people, whatever, oh, we don't have the money. Oh, it's going to take 4 years. So it's not even environmental racism. It's just straight up racism, if you ask me. And unfortunately, you hear this in Detroit a lot too. They got a billionaire, Dan Gilbert owns the Cleveland Cavaliers. He came in, he beautified a 10-block radius. You got a Whole Foods, you got a lot of nice restaurants, bars. Detroit's back. That's the mantra. Detroit's coming back. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you see a Whole Foods, run. And I'm a hypocrite because I occasionally get my avocados from there. But let me tell you, it's smoke and mirrors. The mayor and other people get credit for beautifying places, and we're building it up, and we're bringing young people in, and they're doing it on the backs of poor people, working people, and poison people.
But it's like you don't know who to trust too, because here's another story about the toxic area on the east side where everybody has lupus. There was the worst site of all. It was like a class 2 Superfund inactive toxic site where they found this out again in the early 90s, and they tested for the same thing I said: arsenic, PCBs, VOCs, lead. and they said, okay, this is uninhabitable, like no one can be here, and they sort of let it sit for a while. Then the DEC went in and tested all the levels, so the DEC knows it's there, and they said the only way that anybody can ever live on this land is, oh, I want to get this right, $80 million worth of remediation. That's the only way. So a little time went by, and it just sat there, and children played there, and no one did anything about it. And then the city of Buffalo wanted to buy the land. So they lobbied the DEC and said, we want to buy this land. We're going to only use it for industrial, a parking lot, like this specific land here. So they were allowed to get away with doing $8.5 million of remediation instead of $80 million, with the specific, and it's right on the DEC page, like right back then, like, oh, we did the remediation 8.5, it's only going to be a parking lot. And so this is how messed up it is. So the mayor and the common council, the pastor, are all sort of working together to oppress and control the community. And I said the pastor, and I'm telling you the pastor. He is also the president of the city council, right? The common council, the city council, he is the president. So he bought the land, the pastor bought the land from the mayor. This is with that not $80 million of remediation. And that was based on the PCBs and the VOCs. So he did some more little remediation where he brought the lead levels down to 400 on the land. And all surrounding the land, the lead levels are like up to 6,000, which if you don't know what I'm talking about, believe me, that's fucked up, sorry. Like, that's not good. So they then built a housing unit, like, I think it's something like 30 units in this housing development on the land. The pastor did, the church did. And now they're making millions off of it, which they bought the land for nothing. People are living on it. They never remediated any of the toxins, only the lead. So that's how they snuck that in, which it wasn't even about the lead to begin with. Yet, and I went there the other day, and it's on, you know, I did a Facebook Live with one of the residents who has lupus, whose daughter has lead poisoning, who has had friends who have passed away in the community, and she's standing here showing me the children playing at the park in the backyard of this housing unit, and she says right there, that fence 2 feet away from those kids, it's like over 6,000 level of lead right there. And right there is the aqueduct where the Scajaquada runs through, and the Scajaquada is full of PCBs, and that empties out to Lake Erie. So what is going on? And these people are sick and dying. And it all has to, and I'm bringing it back, I want to end with this, because if you want to like look at the whole picture, it's gentrification. Because the governor, and this is why I say, like, you can never say, oh, the Democrats are great or the Republicans are bad, because the mayor is a Democrat, the governor is a Democrat, and they're doing this shit to the people too. So Cuomo says he's going to invest in 2011 the Buffalo billion to rebuild the city. And we're all thinking, yay, he's going to take care of all the sick people. That was not it at all. That was the $1 million waterfront condos for the rich people, and that was expanding the medical ward. So we have like all these great new hospitals, including one of the biggest hospitals for cancer in the United States, Roswell Park. That's ironic. So they're gentrifying that whole area to push people out and move like people who work in the medical ward there. So that's the Buffalo billion, and that's the underlying thing, is that they want these people sick, dead, or out, and they don't care how they're going to do it. And there's just so much more to it. Like, it's like HUD is in on it, the housing officials are in on it, it's all connected, and they have these people cornered every single angle. These people can't get out. They're working their asses off, they're ending up in homeless shelters, they're getting kicked out of their homes. Like, the details are infuriating, and it would take so long to talk about. Like, just, it's like a game of chess where they have every single move set up so that these people will remain oppressed. It's not fair. They're not taking care of the people. They're literally putting them in positions where they're forcing them out of their home into predominantly white neighborhoods where these people are going there against their will because they have no other way out. And they're waking up in the morning with residents of that neighborhood spray painting their cars in their garages, go back to where you came from, N-word.
Brian Ebel says, I used to do cleanup work. This is very scary. Dave Wright says, vote out the establishment. Vote for progressives only. Working on it, Dave. Dee Dee, not to mention Lyme disease, included in all those autoimmune. I think what's particularly interesting here is that essentially it's not just lead, like she said. I mean, if you have lead found in the soil like that, sometimes lead's evil stepsister is arsenic, which they found in East Chicago and other places in the soil. You have, bacteria concerns in the water, because a lot of times when they say they're doing something about lead, they douse pipes. Instead of changing the pipes, they douse the pipes with phosphates. Phosphates will help recoat lead pipes, but they also are food for bacteria, and that's happened in Flint. But the EPA, the state officials, don't actually thoroughly test for bacteria. It's taken independent water investigators that aren't getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from the EPA to go in there, test for things like chloroform and other things, and they're finding ungodly amounts of chloroform and other chemicals and toxins in the shower. There's no EPA regulations for bathing or showers. Really, the EPA, the lead and copper rule, it's not a sexy topic, but it could be the difference between your kid's life or death, or your life or death. Only really tests water in the sink. It's not looking at soil. It's not looking at any of those things. And by the way, even if they fixed it all right now, if every pipe was replaced in America, the soil has gone into the air, folks. The people have drank the water. You have probably at this point millions and millions of people that are quietly sick in America, in Buffalo.
Well, that's
Flint,
it. It's
North
a
Carolina.
nationwide thing. Like Reuters said, 3,000 areas were worse than Flint, sometimes double, sometimes quadruple. Mm-hmm. What happens to a generation of people when they grow old and they have learning disabilities and a proclivity to violence? You're going to have people in jail, and you're going to have people who are unemployed. And that's, I mean, wouldn't that be what our horrible government wants? They want to continue oppressing people. So a generation of people who they can put in jail or who can't hold a job, oh, bingo. Like, that's a wonderful way to keep the people oppressed, isn't it? So also in Buffalo, police brutality is huge, and that all plays a role into it. They're trying to bully people out of the area. They hired a special task force to go into this one housing development right by where the hospital was being built. And their excuse was that, well, there were so many drugs and gangs in this housing development. I interviewed people in that housing development. They are the nicest people in the world. Like, you want to be their friend. They are good families. And so they hired a special task force to go in there and look over the situation. But if you ask the residents, the task force just went in there to brutalize the people so that they would finally say, fine, I'm leaving. Mm-hmm. And literally, they killed a man. They ran a man over, the cops, with an SUV, and he was mentally ill. They knew he was mentally ill. He was waving around a knife, but they ran him over in front of everyone. And that's just small. I mean, they would go in there and they would find things to arrest people for on the regular until people finally did say, we got to get out of here. And then they demolished the place, and now they have new housing units there for the rich people.
You know what that sounds to me like?
America.
Fascism. Yeah. Sounds like fascist tactics to me. Well, I think that a few things. Number one, I get messages every day just on Facebook of another place that's contaminated with the water, the soil, you name it. I mean, unfortunately, I'd have to be an octopus. She'd have to be an octopus to reach them all. But the reason it's so important, I didn't even put Buffalo in the headline because it's not particularly only about Buffalo. This is everywhere. If you don't take it upon yourself to independently get your home tested, if you live in an area, find out what industrial companies polluting, whether they're dumping their waste products in the water, whether they're putting out coal and other things through the air. Find out what's in your area. Not everybody could get independent testing. It's not cheap. But demand from your city council. Ask them if they know. If the water in the city, they're supposed to be testing water in these vulnerable communities every 6 months in most of these communities. The testing is not the most thorough in most of these places. And also, follow the money, folks. See who your local representatives are taking money from. See who they're having dinner with. Fundraisers and things like that are supposed to be made public, but they're not going to do anything. The people of Flint, nothing was going to change there if they didn't start packing those city council meetings, standing room only. And this is a big issue in Buffalo. It's been going on for a long time, and it's not just an issue of water, it's gentrification. It's trying to drive poor people out to basically make wealthier people wealthy.
And as long as people keep focusing on what the politicians and corporate media want us to focus on, which is stuff that really, like, what kind of amount of money are we putting into the national defense, because they have us so worked up about terrorists, instead of saying, hey, what's the real problem in the country? It's the freaking crumbling infrastructure. I mean, imagine we could put that money into fixing the pipes in this country. It's about sort of, maybe if you're awake to this, you can start trying to bring other people's attention to the real problems in the country, because we have to combat the politicians and the media who try to, you know, lead us one way in the wrong way, because obviously war makes the politicians money. Keeping people sick in the country actually makes them money as well, because pharmaceuticals and such. So I mean, it's just an idea of what are we focusing on in this country? Like, what is important to us? Is it terrorism? Is it having more bombs than any other country? Or is it caring about our neighbors and the people in the country who are suffering, and not buying into whatever propaganda that they're trying to sell us about, you know, that inner city neighborhood is all gangs, so we shouldn't care about them? Because you want to talk about unity. That's what unity is. Caring about things, even if they don't directly affect you. And yeah,
if you are as enthralled and riveted by this dynamic reporter as I am, check her out, truthagainstthemachine.com, Truth Against the Machine's Facebook page, and she is the truth. And thank you for the update, and I will see what I could do on my end to expose what's going on in Buffalo too. I'm going live right after this, actually, on the YouTube. I'd like a few words with my uncle Joe Biden. He's on a, giant, wet, sloppy kiss tour that the media is doing for his book. He has a book out about his son's death. Obviously, that's a serious issue. But the media is allowing Uncle Joe to act like he knows the middle class and he knows who built America. So we're going to look at Uncle Joe's record to see if the record matches the rhetoric. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.